Let's come to the presentation this Saturday morning. And this is the 33rd of the year. And we're looking at the way in which a massive scalar of double transform has by now come into play long enough to have an enormous effect. And as they take traction, two aspects at the same time, asymmetry, are going to occur. The symmetry has to do with time, because we live in a civilization whose dynamic is characterized by time in forms, so that time forms are the dynamic of civilization. Before we came into a full-blown civilization, about 4350 BC, the trigger for that was the attainment of a sustainable written language that was discursive enough for people to learn to read and write initially. And it took about 350 years for the first attempts of that then proved successful, had enough time and dispersion so that about 4000 BC you had a small but growing population of men and women who could read and write. And as they did so, about 4000 BC, it was apparent to them that they had extricated themselves from being able to be satisfied with nature, with the natural cycle. Hence the story of Adam and Eve, who ate from the fruit from the tree of knowledge, an apple, logo, no doubt, and they realized that they were naked in the sense that they were no longer enfolded in the flow of the Eden cultural milieu that man had always been comfortable in and was never naked. Being nude is natural. Being naked is cultural. That cultural shock we need to cover up, especially genitals and all sorts of gender issues. And they were looking for the second tree, the tree of life. When they were closed and not thrown out of Eden, but told that they must go on a quest now, that they are clothed from their nakedness, no longer able to stay in the natural cycle. And so language, which is written and read, is the dynamic by which the time forms of civilization generate an expansion. Because what happens with reading and writing, it's like a royal road to vision, to the visionary consciousness. And the more refined you become, and you do, in learning to read and write in various developments, the more it is that your nakedness needs to be covered, and so the growth of civilization is not the same as the natural cycle of cultures. It becomes increasingly a social realm, which is based upon populations of men and women who are growing in numbers rapidly and who characteristically then collect in cities, hence the term civilization. City-going men and women, because cities are not natural. They're not a part of the natural cycle. It's having come out of what was always naturally sufficient into a new, almost force-fed expansion, where before, to have a collection of many men and women, you were talking of several hundred people at the best. And those large collections of several hundred people were very rare. You might have proto-cities, like in Anatolia at Katulhuliak, that about 6500 BC had a population of about 400 or 500 people, but they were still within the mythic horizon. They still had the horned bull head, clay insets into their walls. They still were within a growing complexity, for sure, of a cultural milieu, but they were not yet technically cities that were into civilization. They were like a proto type that was coming into play. And the origins of those early kinds of proto-cities were the collections seasonally to come together and harvest the grains and husband the animals and so forth, so that they collected together to process the harvesting, to process the herds and the new children and so forth. It was still cultural. The difference between 4000 BC and 1,000 years later, 3000 BC, is monumental. In that 1,000 years, and remember now that cultural men and women, cultural human beings, on a very intelligent scale, were a part of nature on a very intelligent scale. The earliest cave paintings and sculptures in Europe especially go back 40,000 years. They were marvelously tuned to the complexities of the natural cycle. The cultures were very rich, but they were not civilized. They had not learned that with a visionary application, one can tame the wild. You can bring into play not only more animals, but different kinds of animals by crossbreeding. You could have not only a child, but you could now sustain and have several children or a lot of children. And so by 3000 BC, you began to have whole patterns of very capable urban areas that dominated the countryside, the extensions. And so you had kingdoms. In Egypt, they were called nomes. And by 3000 BC, the patterns of making a federation of groups of these gnomes, large groups. In Egypt, there were 2 collections of gnomes, and by 3000 BC they were brought together, 2 confederations of gnomes to make one dynastic kingdom. And the first pharaoh, Menes, is the pharaoh of all of Egypt on the Nile River spinal column, from the Mediterranean to the highlands of what is today Sudan. In Mesopotamia, you had a likewise development. In India, a likewise development. In Central Asia as well. In China as well. By 2000 BC, as we have gone into, it had come to a monumental pass that the 1,000-year millennial time form pairs itself to be 2 millennia to be an aeon, a 2,000-year time form. And between 4000 BC and 2000 BC is an incredible development. But from 2000 BC to 0 BC is what today we would call a quantum jump. Powered by the ability to have a reading and writing, and hence a talking, a conversing, an oral language of great complexity, so that you could have multiple meanings at the same time. When I am speaking here, I am speaking in such a way that those who acclimate to the hearing of it, to the visioning of it, gain insights, so that many levels, many aspects, many facets actually occur simultaneously. We are at the development now where we're beginning to bring into play qualities that were there in the past that could not be seen then, but can be appreciated now. And hence, it is a new past. Yes, it's past, but it is freshly new. More facets are available. And as that happens, as in the time forms of civilization, it immediately begins to have an effect in language. And for us, at 2000 AD, we have learned that a digitization of language, an ability to read the digitization of language, of write it, not just coding and writing in code, but to be able to read the fruit of the coding, which gives us an access to a future where the new past is going to be prolific to the extent of being disconcerting. And in like ways, the way in which the symmetry of the universe operates, the future also at the same time, in the same way, will seem more and more daunting, is a polite way to say it. If one follows the latest scientific publications on the planet, one of the biggest is Science. The lead cover story, brain-inspired chips. The latest issue of Nature, an even bigger worldwide, planet-wide publication, comes out. They come out every week, like the Sunday paper. Nature has been coming out for 120 some years. Here is the road most taken defining the optimal path through quantum space. And here you begin to recognize not a chaos, but a recognizable swirl. It is a swirl which in this truncated form begins to show the form of a double attractor, which is familiar from chaos theory. That there's no such thing as a chaos, really, that if you run something chaotic enough times, fast enough, it begins to have the double attractor butterfly effect show it is a nascent infinity sign, which discloses that even a chaos must emerge out of an eternity. One of the articles in here, which is of great interest, energy studies need social science. And I've put in the handout illustrations a copy of the first page of this article. A broader pool of expertise is needed to understand how human behavior affects energy demand and the uptake of technologies. To secure a safe, reliable, low-carbon energy future, we must alter both technologies and human behavior. The U.S. Department of Energy notes that supply and demand is affected as much by individual choice, preference, and behavior as by technical performance. The sociological, the psychological adjunct to technology is indelibly upon us. There is no way that it not happen and not occur. In fact, at the same time as you get this quality of technology in another weekly science publication, New Scientist, towards time zero, so near the Big Bang and yet so far. And by the way, the auxiliary second most important article, Prisoners of Thought. When random ideas become obsessive fears. And a page of that is also included in your notes, the end of everything, the end of the beginning. It is a quality here of science which comes out in such a way that even on the net, the most popular science website, Science Daily, possible extended symmetries of field theoretic systems. The article, many physical systems from superfluids to mesons are understood to be manifestations of spontaneous symmetry breaking, whereby the symmetries of a system are not realized by the lowest energy state. So all of this, and this is the science of the moment, planet-wide. All of what is not just a cutting edge, but is a cutting refinement of facets of a jewel-like consciousness, which is not limited to an integral unification, which has a symmetrical complement to a differential, expanding scalar that not only expands but has a developmental level by which it jumps into a faster expansion, so that the differential consciousness of vision after it begins to play not only a part of the civilization, which is already refining multiple cultures and changing the animal, the plant, the mineral, the metal worlds, now has a curious kind of mathematical quality to it, which is covered, incidentally, by recursion theory. That the recursion back, not to something linearly before, not to something even in a set matrix that is different, but the differential expansion of the quality of having a completely new past facet, new future possibilities that come faster and faster, so that one has prisoners of thought when random ideas become obsessive fears. To understand that randomness, a polite term for chaos, has a hidden structure. It has a double attractor. Butterfly, the Greek term for the psyche, is psyche. It means in Greek the butterfly. Your psyche is a butterfly that once was a worm, and through a cocooned transform, through an alchemy, it melted into all these fertile juices and grew wings. And those wings, colorful and beautiful, are able, when they are dried, after emerging from the cocoon, able to fly beautifully. So that the time forms of civilization have an increased expansion of men and women who are able to understand that they need to go into a cocooning together on various levels to allow for this transform to occur, and for the butterflies then not only to occur, but to increase the ability for them to participate. They go for the nectar to have more and more butterflies that then are able to populate a rather beautiful world, which is now in jeopardy. It used to be here in Los Angeles about a month ago that one would find great clouds of monarch butterflies. Every year when the cocooning had delivered them and their wings had dried, they would fly up from Mexico. This year you might have seen one or two, because the whole ecology has been interrupted, because the plant world no longer, not only is not natural, it is not civilized, it is demonized. The same is true for animals, the same is true for people. This is intolerable. Demonstrating, having placards, having surveys, having this and that is ineffective. Has no effect whatsoever. Because it requires a change in the alchemy. Because it's in the sabotaged alchemy that it has gone wrong. And a case in point is that the once great alchemical adjunct to civilization for 1,000 years almost was in the Middle East. not only in Egypt, but into the Mesopotamian area of it. So that in between the Egyptian and Mesopotamian, the latest development about 1,300 years ago was the development of Islam, which developed. Where is Mecca? Where is Medina? They're in the Arabian Peninsula, where Yemen is, where Saudi Arabia is, where the Gulf oil states are, etc. And within a generation of the development of Islam from Muhammad's prophetic, future-seeing, new past recutting vision, within a generation of that, just before about the 690s AD, there was the introduction of alchemical realization of vision given to one of the prize princes of the new Islamic power, whose distant descendants who have never given up the alchemy are now in grave danger of their collective lives. Speaking of the Yazidis in northern Iraq, who are seeking to be decimated and eliminated by an Islamic State new caliphate in the 21st century, which is the heights of demonic absurdity. Because the name of that original prince was Khalid ibn Yazid, ibn Muawiyah, king of the Arabs, who was given the hermetical divine secrets, the revelations of Morianus, ancient adept and hermit of Jerusalem. Khalid and his hermetic guide, his Hermes Trismegistus, Morianus, met about the 680s, almost into the 690s AD. Jerusalem by that time had been for many centuries absolutely ruined, in ruins, abandoned. It looked like a small scale of the Piranesi engravings of the ruins of Rome. It was just a village, and it was god-awful. And Morianus was asked by Khalid, when did you come here? And he said, I came here, and he gives him a corresponding thing. The date is about 645 AD. And I've been here ever since. And no one has contacted me. You're the first. And so I will give you the guidance of how to transform through vision, through differential consciousness. You can transform not only metals and minerals, but their effect on plants and animals, and their recursion effect on yourself and on others like you. You can transform human beings so that they do not do this self-destructive suicide or impose it upon others. This little book is the only document in English on it, published by for Brandeis University Press and the University Press of New England in Hanover, New Hampshire, 1974, Lee Stavenhagen, who found the original, a copy of the original manuscript that people had not paid much attention to, and translated into English. And it was published in this little volume that almost nobody knows and nobody sees, except that the Hermetic tradition always records that the transmission of alchemy to Islam, to the Arabs, came through Maurinius, Hermit of Jerusalem. That his name was Khalid ibn Yazid was conveniently lost, so that one finds in the newspapers that the Yazidis, who are fighting for their genocidal lives right now, are those who are not just a religion related to Zoroastrianism that somehow is still tied with Islam, but is in deadly peril demonically from a new caliphate, whereas the original caliphate was about the expansion of the qualities, of the complexities and beauty of Islamic civilization, so that Harun al-Rashid, in the Baghdad of the late 800s, about the 880s, about 200 years after Marianus instructed Khalid ibn Yazid in alchemy, one had a heyday of Hermetic excellence within Islam, and one of the great studies of it, Muslim Neoplatonists, an introduction to the thought of the Brethren of Purity, the Ikhwan al-Safi, by Ian Richard Nettleton, George Allen Unwin in London. And it's about the era of the Arabian Nights, about how Baghdad at that time, Islam at that time, was spreading into Indonesia and spreading into Spain, and was a great swath of magical, transformed, Hermetic inspired civilization on a very high level. One of the highest in the world. One of the most refined in the world. We live in a time where everything is completely misunderstood because it's not understood at all. The scribe of Yazid, Ghalib, relates as follows, and in it he says, how did this come to be passed on to you? And he says, there was an Ostanes who said to Maria that this is our quicksilver that has dominance over our earth, being very clear and pure, while earth is made of crudest water. And Hermes said that earth is the mother of the elements which are born of her and return to her. Moses too said that all things come of the earth and return to it. As Hermes said, just as all things come of one, so also is the great work done with one thing and one substance. The Maria is Maria the Jewess from Alexandria. Ostanes is an Anatolian wise man who comes to the older Maria, who is no longer in Alexandria, but is in what today we call Asia Minor. In fact, she was at that time in Ephesus, where she had been in Alexandria originally, and was the great alchemist, interpreter, in early 1st century AD Alexandria, of how this actually works. because she had a great teacher, her companion, Jesus in Alexandria. They're the seeds of the whole Hermetic tradition expanding into kaleidoscopic consciousness. Let's take a break.